All right, welcome everyone. And again, today is our Phase 1 Release 2 awardee webinar. And again, we hold this webinar to really educate you, especially those who first time getting an award from DOE about their responsibilities with a federal award. And I will just do a brief introduction. I do want to note that the agenda that was sent out was incorrect. There were some time changes. So we will be going instead of till 3, probably to about 3:15 Eastern time, a little longer, just so that the speakers have enough time to cover their topic areas. So first, I did want to send congratulations to everyone who received an award. And I did also want to point out that we did have some delays this year, significant delays in the awards going out. Typically, we announce all the awards on a single day. And this year, we did have to spread that out about 5-week period to get those awards out. This is largely the result of a new requirement from Congress for us to do foreign risk due diligence work. I'll touch on that briefly in a minute, but I did want to know there were some impacts on that, and that actually resulted in why we're having this webinar a little later than we do. We try to get this webinar in soon after you start your grant, but since some of the awardees were delayed significantly, we have delayed this webinar, so I apologize for that. One of the first things that comes up when you get an award is a lot of times you have questions, and so I wanted to start off by saying that there will be different people that you can ask depending on the nature of the question. So if you're, again, new to getting a federal award, the key person will be, for DOE, will be your grant specialist. And they are the person who actually is responsible for overseeing essentially the financial part of your award. So they're the one who actually involved in negotiating and issuing your award. Anything related to changes to your award, personnel, budget, you're going to want to ask your grant specialist if you need to submit something to justify that change. And there'll be more discussion about that later in this talk. If you have some questions about changes in the technical direction of your project, you'll want to talk to your DOE program manager. And again, that was the person who's generally listed on the topic. So when you apply to a certain topic and subtopic, there was the technical program manager listed associated with that individual subtopic. So you'll want to ask them questions if there's anything that's going to require major changes in the technical direction of your project. If you're not sure who your program manager is or who your grant specialist is, you can always contact our office. It's the SBIR and STTR office, and we will be able to direct you to those people. If you have more general questions about applications and submitting a phase 2 application, things like that, we'll be happy to answer those questions as well. So just wanted to start off, if you have questions, make sure. And so once you do know your grant specialist and your DOE program manager, you should write their names down, their contact information down, and make sure you always have that handy. I did want to touch on a couple recent changes to our program, so make sure you're aware of that. A lot of these things are included in our funding opportunity announcements, but sometimes people don't pay attention to every single part of that. So one of the more recent announcements was that technologies invented under SBIR and STTR awards must be substantially manufactured in the United States. So just please be aware of that. That was, again, I believe implemented in 2022. With the passage of the SBIR Extension Act in 2022, Congress also mandated that you disclose as part of your application your foreign relationships. And this is as part of Congress's concern about people having foreign, risk with technology going to foreign countries of concern, particularly those developed under SBIR and STTR. So that's a new requirement. You should have submitted that with your application. If you didn't, we went back to you and asked for that. And again, as part of that disclosure process, we also need to know everyone who's working on the project, any key personnel in your project. Sometimes people will submit an application and they will not specify everyone. They'll say, oh, we're going to have an engineer. We'll determine that later once the project is awarded. So once you do have, if you have any unnamed people in your application, we are going to request that you name those and give us 30 days to approve those. Again, something we just started last year was, again, part of the Extension Act was requiring us to evaluate your cybersecurity practices. And so as part of that, you have to, for phase 2, now again, most folks here are just phase 1 awardees, but if when you submit a phase 2 application, I want to give you a heads up, you will need to submit a cybersecurity self-assessment. We're looking at 16 individual practices and want to know where you are with regard to that. Now, Flo Carr in our office did hold a webinar in September for everybody who will be submitting, well, the first of those webinars in September. There'll be another one for the phase 1 release 2 group coming up later in the year. But just wanted you to be aware of that. It's never too early to begin thinking about your cybersecurity practices and making sure they're have some minimal level to protect you. And again, Congress is asking us to do this to make sure that you don't lose your intellectual property through cyber theft. There's more information on our website here. So, and then finally, a couple of other things as you're getting started here. Again, buried in our solicitation and our topics sometimes. Those of you who need supercomputer resources, DOE does make these available at no charge to our SBIR and STTR awardees. So if that's something that's important to your project, again, here's a link. More information about that is available on our website. And again, there's a whole host of partnering things that you can start working on. Some of you actually took advantage of our Phase Shift 1 program. So kudos to you for taking advantage of that and getting started on that process of, the commercialization aspect of your award. Again, for SBIR awards, we're giving you money to do R&D, but Congress's expectation is that you will commercialize those innovations. And so we are also providing some things over and above the award to help you in that regard. So, and we'll have more discussion on a lot of these things next week at the Principal Investigator meeting. So I will just stop there and I will turn it over to Mike Dobbs. I don't know if there's any questions that came in about the slide deck and recording. Yes, will be made available to everybody attending the webinar. So.
Good morning and good afternoon. This is Mike Dobbs. I'm Deputy Chief Counsel for Intellectual Property. My office is charged with responsibility of over $5 billion of DOE-funded research and development, covering both financial assistance and 11 of the 17 national laboratories that DOE has. I'm excited to be here today in support of this SBIR STTR program. Before I have some slides, but I wanted to kind of take a pause, and hopefully everybody can see my slides. I wanted to take a pause and think a little bit about what the goals of this program are, and imagine for a minute your wildest dreams have come true, and all the technical aspects of your work has come to fruition. It's working better than you could have dreamed. Now, as we're kind of in this Ralph from the Christmas Story kind of imaginary vision, let's think about your intellectual property. Are you in a situation where you are now fighting with competitors that have moved in and seen this latest, greatest inventions in sliced bread and are now competing with you? Or B, are you in a position where you have some adequate patent protection and now you're talking with your own counsel, talking about licensing and licensing agreements and fees, or maybe you're commercializing yourself, but you have a nice big stick with patent protection to prevent competitors. So, it really varies what you're looking for, but we want you to be successful. And that's why I really want us to take a minute to talk about intellectual property and what we can do with it. And that's why also I want everyone to kind of take a note to talk to your attorney friends. Hopefully you have some kind of counsel you can talk to and review these award terms and really think about what your intellectual property strategy is going to be, hopefully when you hit that big win. So to help that, with my almost 20 years of experience, I've tried to distill down some key takeaways, some key pitfalls that I've seen you can run into. And we'll talk about each one of these in detail today. But first, properly mark those reports of yours. You have that SBIR STTR marking that's in your terms and conditions. use it. That'll give you 20-year data protection. All those subject inventions, make sure you're reporting those in IDISN, not just patents. And watch out for those statutory bars. That is not a DOE specific thing. This is really to help you. It's a common mistake where we just publish and then try to get patent protection. That's going to be a problem. And then as Manny already mentioned, U.S. manufacturer requirements. Obviously, U.S. manufacturing has been key to the department, and we've kind of had a tougher stance in the last couple of years. And I'll get to that in a little bit, but watch out for those requirements as well. So before we dive into patent rights and then data rights, it's always helpful to kind of give a little bit of a background as to what that means. So copyright, that the key word here is that it's an original work of authorship and it's fixed in a tangible medium of expression. So that basically means that, when you write something down on a piece of paper as a tangible medium of expression, and this is protection to prevent others from copying what you wrote down, basically. And the same thing applies to, music and movies and those sorts of things, right? As far as disclosure to the government, typically the only deliverable we have in these awards is financial assistance, is that final technical report. So typically we're not going to get anything but that report, and you can put the little copyright in there, that symbol with the C with the circle on that. That's fine. If you do that, we ask that you acknowledge the government license because we do publish these, but you may copy protect that. Patents are a little bit different than invention rights because it's a different form of intellectual property that is protecting a new and useful process, machine, manufacture, composition of matter, and any new or useful improvement thereof, right? And patents aren't automatic. You have to work ideally with a patent attorney that's going to understand your invention, draft up a patent application, work with the patent office, and get a granted patent that you can use to exclude others from practicing your invention. And that's where you can get those royalties. You can't, they can try to reverse engineer your invention, your technology, but if you have that patent and they're practicing a patent, you can tell them to stop, and they have to by law, or they can go get a license from you. But those inventions, and notice I said invention, not patent, those inventions which come before the patents, you have an idea, you write it down, those will need to be disclosed sooner. So I want to jump into data rights, but also data is another point of confusion I've noticed throughout the years. When I say data, I'm not talking about research data, but all recorded information, regardless of form, is what your terms say. And then as number one was mark your data. There's really, for these awards, there's two markings. You should be marking your privately funded data. The good news is the privately funded data should really only been in your proposal, your technical proposal when you applied for this award. Hopefully you mark that. The good news is we don't publish those. We don't do anything with those anyway, but make sure anytime, even in applications, you're looking to make sure that you're applying the correct marking on those applications. But as far as generated data for these types of awards, there's two categories. Unlimited rights, that means unlimited rights to the government. And that's basically if I'm in my office or in Mandy's office or Mark's office, if there's a document there that does have markings on it, we have unlimited rights in it. And we're under no obligation to protect that. But for SBIR awards, we have special statutory data under this program that gives 20-year data protection for generated data. And so if your data is important to you on these final technical reports, you should be marking that data with that 20-year SBIR SCTR data protection. And this is what the legend looks like in the top box. And when you submit it in our Awardees system, so at the end of your work, you'll submit their final technical report. You should identify that on the website as 20-year SBIR SCTR protected data rights. And here's a larger slide of what that legend looks like. And this, again, is in your award terms. And this is what the Awardees website will look like. And the key is about halfway down the page where it says STI product type. That's the SBIR SCTR final technical report. And then on the bottom, you see way on the bottom, intellectual property distribution limitations, small business innovative research data. And also when you're going through that final tech report, describing all your achievements, you have to make sure, you keep in mind that these reports, we do publish them after that 20-year protection period. So obviously we don't need any personally identifiable information. Any of your privately developed data should not be on there. Obviously, anything classified, subject to export control, make sure you talk with us before it's there. But we do ask, we take data protection very seriously. So we do ask that you not include any markings that are not authorized by the terms of your agreement. And those would include markings like proprietary, confidential, business sensitive, or similar markings. They're not authorized, and we don't want to publish something that says proprietary or confidential on that. We'd have to go back. And so we will go back as part of our review when we get those and ask you to remove them. Ask that you just make it easy for everybody and just not include those markings. Make sure you're looking at the terms and conditions of your award and using the appropriate markings. And other markings, as I mentioned, if you are so inclined to put the copyright notice on there, that's fine. We do ask that you also acknowledge the government license. Third-party copyrighted material should really not be on there. We take the protection of other people's intellectual property serious as well. We don't want to infringe on anyone else's copyrighted material. As I mentioned, data generated with private funds should not be on that. And I've been talking a lot about data protection, and this is also where you're going to want to engage with your own counsel. These data markings that are in your awards are really for protection against disclosure by the government. When you're working with others, you'll also want to consider things like non-disclosure agreements. I'm not going to go into details today, but something for you to keep in mind that anytime you're sharing data, you'll want to think about what markings are on there and make sure you use the appropriate markings. Timely report all subject inventions. So unlike the data rights terms, the patent terms for these SBIR CDR awards are standard. Standard underneath what's called the Bayh-Dole Act that was enacted in 1980. That was kind of a shift from, hey, the government is paying for these innovations. We get the government gets invention rights, to why don't we give those invention rights to the entity that is retaining those, or the entity that came up with those inventions, right? So whoever came up with those inventions are able to retain those rights, the rights to those inventions. And there are such, that does require an election of title. It does require disclosure. I'll talk about that in a minute. And there are situations when the government can take title to those inventions. So invention reporting. First, what is an invention? And I love the statutory definition here. Is invention means any invention or discovery which is or may be patentable or otherwise protectable under, and that's basically the patent statute. Pretty broad. And I see the statute, and this is largely from the Bayh-Dole Act, is really piggybacking off of your existing process for managing inventions. What we're really honing in on for disclosure is subject invention, and that's any invention of the recipient, so that's your business, conceived or first actually reduced to practice in the performance of work under this award. Conceived meaning that the idea popped up in your head, and first actually reduced to practice meaning that you actually built what it was and actually saw that invention work in the real world. And the third option, this again is something that you really should be doing if you're not doing already. But if you have employees come in and are performing work, you should have those written agreements whereby all those inventions by that particular employee are assigned to your company. You don't want them leaving with those inventions and bringing them to a competitor, for example. So, and this slide outlines the process. You're going to have the invention report, which is different from getting a patent. Invention report is, hey, your inventor came up with an idea and they wrote it down and then they gave it to whoever in your company is responsible for managing those. And maybe that's you, that you receive those and you kind of track them in Excel spreadsheet. Whatever works for you, but you should have a process for timely receiving those so you can work and make your business decision whether or not you want to pursue those, and then work with outside counsel to make sure you have a good strategy. Once your office, whoever it is that receives those invention disclosures, receives that, and within 2 months, just that invention disclosure should go into the IDISN system and get reported as a subject invention. And then you have a 2-year period to decide whether or not you want to keep the invention or not. And then once you've made the decision, let's say you have decided you want to pursue patent protection on this, you have another year to file. And something to point out, we give these awards, to help you and commercialize things. These timelines are extendable. Given that we are in a first to file patent regime, I would hesitate to go beyond. This is 3 years already, but there are certainly situations where maybe an invention was reported too early. They really need further research to really flesh out what that invention is. We certainly liberally grant extensions in those situations. We just want to see the intellectual property protected, and we don't want to see it going, say abroad to a foreign country. ISIN contacts, hopefully everybody has an ISIN account. If you don't, all you need is that award number to start that process. You're going to need to report those inventions timely. And at the end of the award, you're going to have a patent certification. You're going to have to certify you've reported all these. So make sure if you don't have an ISIN account that you go ahead and sign up for one. And if you have any questions reporting inventions or about the timeline, Marissa Rodriguez in my office is very, very knowledgeable on the ISIN system. Feel free to contact her. And this is what the timeline looks like. Invention disclosure, as I said earlier, 2 months to report the invention to ISIN, 2 years to decide whether or not you want to keep that invention, 1 year for the initial filing, and then hopefully, within a few years after that, you'll get the patent. And at that time, in between that time, that's when you can publish and look at sales. And you're going to want to talk to your own attorney about that in the process. But you can lose patent rights if you publish first and then patent. And we do ask that you submit what's called a confirmatory license, confirming the government's license and those patents sometime after you file the patent application. And like I said earlier, all of this is extendable. This kind of highlights a lot of what I just said. The only thing I'd really add on this slide, point out, is the government support clause, which your attorney should know about this. When you submit that patent application to the patent office, you're going to identify DOE's funding. And then if you decide you want to elect and then later on decide you don't want to pursue patent protection, just let us know. In the ISIN system, it's just a simple drop-down box. You change from retained title to not retained title. And a government DOE attorney reviews those inventions to see if there's anything that DOE should pursue patent protection on. And I'd be remiss to point out that you may see some patent filing fees at the patent office. They can be a little bit expensive, but there are micro and small entity discounts to help small businesses. Which goes into the important topic of interest is patent prosecution allowability costs. For phase 1, there's $6,500 and then $50,000 for phase 2. These funds can be authorized for patent prosecution costs on subject inventions. So this isn't just some invention that you came up with outside of the SBIR award. It has to be either in that phase 1 or phase 2 effort that subject invention came out. So if you are paying patent prosecution costs using these funds, that invention should be in ISIN, right? Because it's only on subject inventions, and subject inventions should be reported in ISIN. And that patent application should eventually go into ISIN as well. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that these funds can also be used for general intellectual property, commercialization costs, stuff like freedom to operate, market analysis, those sorts of things. And closeouts, as I mentioned earlier, at the end of the award, you will get what's on the form here on the right to just certify that all those inventions have been reported in ISIN. You have a short listing on there. If you have no inventions, you certify that, and then you list your subcontractors out. If there's no inventions, no subcontractors. Really tried to streamline the form over the last few years, so you basically just have to sign your name certifying that. But this form is super important for both DOE and small businesses because it's kind of a way where we can kind of take a pause and make sure all these valuable inventions have been reported, because it's easy for these to slip through the cracks. Then the award's closed, and then we have everything reported. But it doesn't stop the requirement that you report these subject inventions after closeout. If an inventor comes to you and says, "Oops, I should have disclosed this to you. Here's another invention," just simply report that in ISIN. Again, it's 2 months from when you receive it. Not 2 months from when it pops in the inventor's mind or something. No one can track that. It's only from the time that you receive it. So not a problem. Just report it. Statutory bars. Can't emphasize this enough to watch those statutory bars. Now, what is a statutory bar? You can't get patent protection on something that is patented, obviously, right? Somebody else patented it before you did. We're in a first to file now. Described in a printed publication, in public use, sale, or what's scary to me, or otherwise available to the public. So in the United States, we do have what's generally referred to as a 1-year grace period. Most other countries do not have that grace period. So when you publish it, you've lost those patent rights. And so one of the common myths, and you hear this a lot at universities, this idea that you want to publish or perish. It creates this false dichotomy against publishing and patenting, when really what you should be looking at is filing a quick provisional patent application, for example, getting that patent protection in place, which could be done very quickly. Then you can publish and you keep both those patent rights and you get that publication. And finally, U.S. manufacturing. Definitely look at the funding agreement, your award terms, and the DOE guidance. Here's a link to DOE's U.S. manufacturing. In short, it requires any of these inventions be substantially manufactured in the United States. Now, we certainly recognize that that is the goal, but there's different supply chains that may not be flushed out, and we certainly don't want to prevent you from being successful in your business. If there is a situation where you feel like you need a modification of that waiver, just contact DOE. There's some information here as well as information on our U.S. manufacturing page to seek those modifications to that U.S. manufacturing requirement. And I'll share these slides. This is the actual U.S. competitiveness clause. You'll see highlighted there is that manufactured substantially in the United States. So key takeaways: property, mark those reports, which really should be the final technical report, although you can use the same markings on your interim reports. Timely report all those subject inventions, not just patents, and report them in IADISN. If you have any questions, feel free to contact Marissa Rodriguez, my office. Watch out for those statutory bars. This isn't a DOE thing. This is just a patent thing. Watch out for statutory bars. We don't want you to lose those valuable patent rights. And watch out for the U.S. manufacturing requirements. Consult DOE early. Don't wait until you're substantially manufacturing abroad and realize, oh, I was supposed to contact DOE. It's much, much easier to resolve these things up front. So I did want to end with a little bit of a bonus round. As I said, my office supports 11 of the 17 national laboratories and other grants offices. So, it's important that you work well with others. You have in your award terms, you'll see in G of the patent clause in particular, follow the award terms for the subcontracts. Laboratory contracts are a little bit different because you've got DOE awards on both sides. So we have special technology transfer agreements to deal with that. And we're most excited, at least I'm very excited on about the SBIR, SCTR strategic partnership project that our labs have. That's kind of a pre-approved streamlined template where most of the labs at this point, I actually just got an email today that PPPL just signed on to have that template used. So the whole point here is it's a quick take it or leave it agreement, so we can quickly with the best deals, so we can quickly start these projects using laboratory resources. But I also wanted to point out here, our laboratories also have CRADAs, which are a little bit more collaboration agreements. If you're looking for things like a performance guarantee or something a little bit unusual, we have ACTs. And Manny mentioned earlier, things like our computing resources, user facilities. We are open for business, not just for the SBIR, SCTR recipients, but any really domestic entity, but there's also some foreign entities to use our user facilities, either through a non-proprietary user agreement at no cost, where you publish results, or a proprietary user agreement where you're providing full cost reimbursement. So that's all I have for today. I don't know if there's any questions or if you have time for questions at this point.
Oops, sorry, yeah, we do have time, and there was one question that was submitted. If anybody else has any questions, this is a good time to submit. I did want to point out that a couple of our speakers, Mike Dobbs and Mark Soika, will be at the PI meeting. So if you don't come with your questions today, they will be attending, and you will be able to schedule a one-on-one meeting with them. And you can actually probably go ahead and do that now if you'd like to, before the meeting. So first question, do we need to report through ISN if we do not believe anything in our phase 1 was patentable?
I think short answer, yes. I'm trying to find the definition here. The definition of invention, again, is any invention which is or may be patentable. So it's a gray area. And this question oftentimes, whether or not it's patentable, it oftentimes turns into whether or not we want to get a patent on it or not. So I would err definitely on the side of reporting it. Certainly don't want to open things up to just receive, junk invention disclosures, but in the avoidance of doubt, I disclose it. If it's not patentable, I mean, it's really not going to do any harm reporting it to DOE because we're not going to do anything with it. But if it is, questionable, then yeah, it certainly send it up.
All right, next question is about trade secrets. Should this be reported to ISN?
Yeah, so at least for DOE, there's really no trade secrets. We have a 20-year data protection for the data that we receive, but there is no exception as far as reporting inventions for trade secrets. So if there's a new invention that was conceived or first actually reduced to practice in the performance of the award, it should be reported at ISN.
Okay, next question. When collaborating with the DOE lab on an SBIR, and the invention is co-invented, which entity has the right to file first?
Yeah, that's a good question. So because of the Bayh-Dole Act, small businesses, so nonprofits and small businesses can retain title to their inventions when you're working on a federal award. And by law, we cannot withhold, we being the government or any government-funded awardee cannot withhold granting an award based on getting those IP rights from you. So you are entitled to keep your own inventions. Our labs are run by their contractor operated laboratories, which are run primarily by nonprofit entities. So because there's federal funds here, they are able to retain rights to their own inventions. You will retain rights, obviously, to your own inventions, but it doesn't end there. The labs obviously are in the business of really more technology transfer. It's going to be surprising if they're at all interested in commercializing anything that you're working on. So the laboratory in those situations would certainly be open to negotiating up to an exclusive license in any of the lab inventions to get that where it should be to commercialize it.
All right, yeah, the question was specific to like co-inventions and the right to file first. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so the co-inventions, so the lab, so they would be co-owned, basically. The lab would own their inventor's share and the small business would own their share. And which one would have the right to file first, you would coordinate that. Pretty much in all situations, I would see the small business taking the lead and basically a consolidation of title in there.
Okay. A few more here. This one may be more for me. I'm confused about the PI meeting. I thought I had to schedule the PI meeting with the award program manager according to the reporting requirements. So yeah, the PI meeting is principal investigator meeting. Again, this is a 2-day meeting where we bring all the PIs in and really go into more detail about the expectations of their awards, commercialization. We have a lot of speakers, past awardees talking about their experience with the program. So it's really very beneficial to go to the PI meeting for the, it's not, just for the content that's there, especially if you're new to DOE and haven't received an award. And again, the feedback from PIs going to the meeting has always been very positive. The reporting requirement is just a verbal progress report that you need to give to your DOE program manager. So that is correct. As far as the reporting requirements are concerned, that has nothing to do with the PI meeting. Some of the DOE program managers go to the PI meeting just so you can have that verbal progress report there. So you can always connect with your DOE program manager, ask them if they're going to the PI meeting, and you can do a face-to-face meeting if they're going to do that. If they're not, they have conflicts, you can just schedule that outside of the PI meeting. So I did want to clarify that. The PI meeting and the phase 1 progress report requirement are not the same thing, so. Again, some more questions here. Following up, if there was no it that was patentable in our phase one, what exactly we report to IEDISON?
Really nothing. So in that invention certification at the end, you would certify that there are no subject inventions, and then in that case, there would be nothing to report in IEDISON.
Next question, are invention disclosures reviewed by a person or automated for completeness, accuracy, and relevance?
That is Maritza Rodriguez. Any inventions that's disclosed, all inventions that are disclosed in IEDISON are reviewed, primarily just to make sure, the invention titles match. We don't want to have the wrong document in there, and that there is something that looks like an invention disclosure. And really on that, you'll see in the IEDISON system whether or not it's accepted and rejected. If it's rejected, it'll list why. Again, I mean, that's not a process I would really worry about. If you're running any hiccups, Maritza's great at resolving those types of issues. Really what we're looking for there is just have the details, and it's in your award terms. Things like the invention, the invention title, description, short description of it, a listing of the award. That type of information will go in there. And if we need more information, you'll know about it, and you'll see when it gets accepted.
Last one, does your office provide templates for the written agreements with employees to report inventions?
That's a good question. We don't have one. We could look at adding one, but I mean, they're fairly standard. This is particularly valuable for universities. There was a terrible case with Stanford v. Roche a few years ago where, the short of it is the university didn't get any rights in an inventor's invention because there was an assignment issue. So having these assignments in place with a present assignment is valuable for small businesses, large businesses, and universities.
Okay, I think we'll end it there. I did want to point out one thing. Mike did mention these technical and business assistance funds, or TABA funds, that are available that can be used for patent prosecution. And I did want to point out that those funds, the request for those funds must be included in your phase one or phase two application. Those are not funds you can, just decide later on, like, oh, by the way, I decided I need these funds now. So important to plan very carefully for that. We know in phase one, a lot of people, are not up to speed to be able to do that. A lot of people use our phase one TABA provider. They don't provide patent prosecution, but they provide a lot of other commercialization services. For phase two, we do not have a provider. So I do want to emphasize very strongly, when you prepare your phase two application, there is $50,000 available for patent prosecution, other commercialization related expenses. And you generally do not want to leave that money on the table. In a way, it communicates to us that you're not really serious about commercialization if you don't request those funds. So I just want to point that out. All right, so we will conclude there. And Mike, thanks very much. It was a great presentation. We will turn it over to Mark for the next presentation. And Mark, you're still muted if you're. I'm hoping we didn't have a internet connectivity problem and we've lost.
Got it? Okay. Mandy, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. Good afternoon. My name is Mark Soika, and I'm one of two SBIR STTR team leaders at the Department of Energy Office of Science Consolidated Service Center, Chicago office. And I'm going to be discussing an important topic which impacts each and every one of you, the proper administration of your phase one award. This administration is just as important as the work you are performing under your grants. When your company's authorized individual signed the standard form 424, your company agreed to comply with all terms and conditions, whether or not you read them. I understand there's a lot of information to digest, but that's a condition of receiving federal assistance. To help you meet the compliance requirements of your award and what you agreed to, I'm going to highlight some key terms and conditions and reporting requirements that I believe are of great importance.
And Mark, did you mean to share some slides yet? Or
Oh, I thought I did.
Yet?
I thought I did. I'll try
We're
again.
not seeing them yet, so I just want to let
Okay.
you know.
How about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
So my presentation today will cover site visits, findings, the importance of knowing your terms and conditions, award attachments, revisions to your award needing prior approval, current pending support, disclosure of foreign relationships, and closeouts. DOE has conducted site visits both in person and virtually over the past few years. And the purpose of these site visits was to check for compliance with award terms and conditions. While we were there, we reviewed companies' ASAP draws and supporting documentation. We performed accounting system reviews to ensure that costs are being segregated properly. If companies had equipment under their awards, we looked to see if companies could indicate where that property was and whether or not they had property controls, whether or not they had adequate insurance. And lastly, the point of going out there and meeting with companies was to answer any questions that recipients had. While out there, some of the findings that we ran across were companies didn't always have adequate support for their ASAP draws. A lot of companies drew down funds in advance of incurring expenses rather than after reimbursement. Under SBIR STTR awards, for-profit companies should only be drawing down reimbursements after incurring the expense. And what determines when you can do that is on what basis of accounting the company is. If you're on a cash basis form of accounting, companies need to pay for that expense out of their own funds before drawing those funds down out of ASAP. If you're on an accrual base, it's when you book that expense in your system that you can draw those funds down for reimbursement. Another finding that we ran across is companies for those ASAP draws couldn't provide us a snapshot indicating the budget elements. So if a company drew down $40,000 on a certain date, they should be able to show what budget categories comprise that $40,000 draw: direct labor, travel, indirects, etc. Many companies couldn't give that snapshot. They could only show a running total from when the grant started to that point in time when they drew down those funds. Several companies didn't have, they were missing their quarterly financial reports. They weren't being submitted on time. One company that had property couldn't show us where that property was that they said they purchased. And we found out 2 weeks later that their subcontractor had it 4 states away. So if you have property, a company needs to always know where that property is at all times. Lastly, one company was touting how robust their travel system was. And then when they showed us a trip report, the per diem that were being paid out were higher than what the stated policy limits were. So these are all things that we're looking for. So again, it's complying with your terms and conditions is what we're looking for when we're out at these site visits. So you're wondering, is what's going to happen if I don't read my terms and conditions? Is anybody really going to notice? And the answer to that question is yes. DOE is going to notice, the IG is going to notice, the Office of Inspector General, when we're going out looking at companies. So this slide shows some of the administrative remedies that DOE can take, as well as some more severe remedies that we can take when a company is not in compliance with the terms and conditions. Some administrative ones that we can take are removing companies from ASAP and putting them on invoice. So you won't be able to draw down funds out of ASAP. You'll have to submit an invoice. DOE will have to approve it. And once it's approved, then the company can then draw down the proportionate share to pay the invoice. We can also temporarily withhold cash payments. We can deny future SBIR applications due to past performance. And then in cases of phase 2, we can withhold continuation funding. Now, if those administrative remedies don't work, what else can we do? We can disallow costs in part or in total through cost recovery. We can terminate the award in part or in total. We can initiate suspension and debarment proceedings. We can withhold further federal awards from companies. And then we can take any other remedies that may be legally available to us. So when a company is determined non-compliant with the terms and conditions, again, there's things that we can take, but we don't want to, it's work on our end. But again, the point of giving you funds is research. And if you're not properly spending those funds, there are some remedies that we can take. So this slide just shows some examples of some findings that we ran across through audits. Companies under SBIR, when they're not in compliance with their minimum level of effort, DOE sought and recovered funds to make us whole. Again, that's a statutory requirement for SBIR phase 1. And that the awardee needs to perform at least 67% of the effort themselves. And if throughout the course of the award, if that minimum percentage is not maintained, funds could be recovered back to DOE to make us whole. We've also been, companies have been taken to court, and through restitution, we have recovered funds for false claims, funds not being used for the purposes that they were provided for. But 3 years ago, I had to testify in a case where a company was found guilty of indictment, wire fraud. So it was pretty severe. They had to pay back over $1 million, and the company received, I think, about 3.5 years of jail time. So I kind of wanted to point out the importance of what can happen if things go awry under your award, but to help educate you guys with some important things, I want to spend some time talking about some attachments that have been transmitted to your companies via the Fight Connect. And some of these attachments are listed here on this slide. And I'm going to spend some time talking about 3 of them: the special terms and conditions, the federal assistance reporting checklist, or something that's called the reporting requirements, and lastly, the general terms and conditions. The special terms and conditions stated in 2 CFR 200 and as amended by 2 CFR Part 910, which is the DOE specific portion of 2 CFR. And some of these clauses that I want to highlight that are of great importance in that special terms and conditions are shown here. And Clause 1C is the award project period and budget periods. So that's showing what your government share is and the period of performance. Clause 3.2, which most companies have, indicates that your funds can be drawn down out of ASAP. But again, as I stated before, it needs to be via a reimbursement method. So you shouldn't be drawing funds out of ASAP in advance of incurring the expense. It needs to be after you have incurred that expense. It's reimbursement. Clause 7.1, rebudgeting and recovering of indirect costs. And this clause basically indicates that DOE is not going to allow rebudgeting just to allow companies to recover indirect costs they potentially have willingly are under recovering when they submitted their budget and the award was made. So we're just not going to give you more money, or we're not going to make budget revisions simply for indirect cost changes. Clause 13, the reporting requirements. And the importance of this clause is stating that the importance of complying with the included reporting requirements, and that failure to comply with the reporting checklist is considered a material non-compliance. And under non-compliance, we could take those remedies that I discussed a few slides ago. Clause 14, publication. DOE is encouraging recipients to publish or otherwise make publicly available the results of their work performed. And lastly, clauses 25A, D, and G are included in your special terms if you have been awarded equipment in your approved budget. The next attachment that I'm going to talk about is the reporting requirements. And this document indicates what the reporting requirements are, when the individual requirements are to be submitted, and to whom they are to be submitted. The main requirements to be submitted during the phase 1 performance period are the RPPR, the Research Performance Progress Report, which Manny touched on, and many of you are going to be giving that progress report in person next week at the PI meeting. In some cases, a special status report is required, which typically is not needed, but if it is, it's required to be submitted within 5 calendar days of an event occurring. And please consult page 5 of the reporting checklist for instructions on what to include in that special status report. Quarterly, during your phase 1 period, quarterly financial reports are to be submitted. Even if your award was made late, and you have no expenditures during that quarter, a $0 report is still required to be submitted on that quarterly report. Another compliance that you may have to provide is a for-profit compliance audit report. Usually this doesn't happen during phase 1 because of the dollar value, but for any company that expends more than $750,000 in DOE funds during a company's fiscal year is required to submit a compliance audit to DOE. And again, that's an independent audit. DCAA does not perform that audit. But again, it's checking on whether companies are in compliance with the terms and conditions. I do want to point out that findings in these compliance audits might be as severe as being 1 day late in submitting your quarterly financial reports. So those are findings. And if it happens 2 years in a row, that's a repeat finding. And DOE could withhold awards from your company if for those types of non-compliance. Also, that's something that was added about 2 years ago, was the disclosure of foreign relationships and current and pending support. So any changes that have occurred during the performance of your phase 1 period need to be reported. If you, as Manny stated earlier, if you listed TBDs for effort on your budget under Section A, senior key personnel, you need to submit who those people are at least 30 days prior to bringing them on board so DOE can approve them. And lastly, a life cycle certification is going to be required, hopefully no later than 30 days prior to the end of your phase 1 period of performance. And that life cycle certification basically is requiring you to certify that you're still a eligible small business, that the PI is still primarily employed at your company under SBIR, that you're meeting the minimum level of effort during that phase 1 period. And again, so that needs to be submitted at least 30 days prior to the end of your phase 1 period. In addition to what is required during performance of your phase 1 period of performance, the reporting checklist also indicates what requirements are to be submitted when your award is over. If you don't go on to phase 2, the reporting checklist does indicate what needs to be submitted for closeout of your phase 1 award. And that would be a final financial report, a final patent certification, a final property certification. Even if you didn't have property under your award, you still need to submit a final property certification. You'll also be submitting your final technical report, and that'll be submitted via ASTI. And lastly, if you haven't already done so, the specialist who's working on closing out that award will be requesting the SBIR funding certification that I just talked about. Another attachment that I want to go over is the general terms and conditions. And the GTCs highlights those requirements which are pertinent to research grants in general. However, what's included in the general terms and conditions isn't an exhaustive list. And I do want to highlight some clauses that I think are of importance in the GTCs. One of the clauses talks about what revisions to your award require prior DOE contracting officer approval, current pending support, reporting on disclosure of formal relationships, property, and level of effort requirements for the company and the PI. The GTCs also contain clauses concerning patent rights and rights and data, but I won't go over that because Mike Dobbs did a great job in his presentation discussing that. Because I feel like revisions are an important topic, I do want to spend some time talking about it. Changes to the PI and key personnel need prior DOE approval by the contracting officer. That is not the DOE program manager. Program managers have no authority to approve changes to your award. They can only concur on the effort or changes. So as the clauses in the general terms indicate, changes to the PI and to key personnel need to be submitted via the Portfolio Analysis and Management System, or PAMS. If you're changing PI in the form that you're submitting via PAMS, you need to indicate how you're going to handle the existing PI. Are they still going to remain on your award, but in some other capacity, or should they be removed in total from the project? You also need to include the resume or CV of that new proposed PI. And along with that new PI, you do need to provide a certified resume and current and pending support for that individual. We ask that request be submitted by an authorized representative from your company. And I also now want to talk about some other changes to your award which require prior DOE CO approval. If you are proposing to change a subcontractor or add a subcontractor to your award, DOE has to make that approval first before you do so. Also, if you are going through a novation agreement or you're changing your company's name, that requires prior approval. Proposing work to be performed outside the United States, that requires prior approval by a DOE contracting officer or CO. And lastly, no fund extensions. And I want to spend some time talking about that because that's probably the most common form of revision that we receive, and one that usually doesn't get submitted in a timely fashion. As stated here, prior approval is required for a no fund extension. However, DOE will not grant an extension if there is no remaining funds under the award. So if you have no balance financially under if all funds have been obligated and spent, we're not going to grant a no fund extension. Recipients are not authorized to grant themselves a no fund extension, and the proposed end date for that extension can't go beyond the start date for the upcoming phase 2 period. As I stated earlier, requests for no fund extensions need to be submitted via PAMS no later than 10 calendar days prior to the expiration date. And that's reaffirmed in clause 43 in the GTCs. And we ask that if the PI is separate and distinct from the business officer at the company, we ask that the request come from the business officer for that no fund extension. And the reason being is the business officer usually is more familiar with the terms and conditions of the award. So when you submit that no fund extension request, please indicate the project status, the reason for the extension, the new proposed extension end date, and your remaining grant balance. Next, I'd like to talk about current pending support. Again, companies were required to provide this when they submitted the application. If your budget indicated that you're proposing grad students or key personnel or postdocs, but they were to be determined, and their resumes were not submitted, and therefore the people weren't named, you do need to submit a certified resume for that individual, and their current pending support also certified at least 30 days prior to that person joining the project. And again, that needs to be approved by a DOE contracting officer. And the whole basis for requiring this information is it allows the identification of any potential conflicts, duplication of effort, overcommitments by the PI or personnel, and also any other areas of sources of support. Also, any foreign government-sponsored talent recruitment programs must be identified in the current and pending support. Disclosure of foreign relationships is pretty important, as Manny indicated at the beginning of this webinar. Failure to this or knowingly failing to disclose these relationships can result in adverse actions being taken against a company. This is mainly because of the potential for a security risk. Any changes to the disclosures that you've made in your application need to be submitted at least 30 days after that change has taken place, but also within 30 days prior to the end of the phase 1 performance period. This slide indicates some penalties that DOE can take, and basically it's recovery of costs for, again, this is for willful or intentional failure to disclose. So, I mean, we can terminate the award, we can recover funds, you may face criminal penalties or other civil penalties as well. So your award's over, now what? Closeouts. Somebody either from my office or from our closeout contractor at headquarters will be contacting you, requesting that your final reports and final requirements are submitted. And these are shown here: your final technical report, your final financial report, final patent cert, property cert, life cycle certification, your annual your annual TABA disclosure that can be submitted with your final technical report. And as I last indicated too, you'll need to provide a final disclosure for relationships at least 30 days prior to the expiration date. When in doubt, look at your reporting requirements. If you have questions, first line of defense is contact your grant specialist. That's the person that you all worked with at the Chicago office to get that award put in place. And they're also listed on page 2 of the assistance agreement, and that's the award that was sent to you via FedConnect, along with those attachments that I just discussed. This last slide indicates some points of contact. Either contact questions regarding your award can be directed to my office in Chicago at the information provided on page 2 of the assistance agreement. If you have questions regarding patents, you can contact Cynthia Ridge in Mike Dobbs' office. Any questions regarding technical issues, performance, contact your program manager. And any PAMS questions, please contact the PAMS help desk. So with that, thanks for your time, and I'll take questions.
Yeah, Mike, and we do have several questions. So let me just start with we have a lot of questions on the quarterly financial reports.
Sure.
I think just, if you want to generally discuss that, I think we'll probably cover most of those. People are, just for reference, these awards, as you're aware, were the official grant start date was 7/22, although many people didn't receive their awards until after, July, maybe until August, September. So
Right, and that's why I indicated, so the quarterly reports and their calendar quarters, so January through March, April through June, July through September, October through December. If you had if the start date of the phase one was July and your award was made in late September and therefore you didn't really have a time to start and didn't draw down anything, you are still required to submit a $0 report for the quarter July through September.
All right, next question. I thought the compliance audit threshold was increased to $1 million effective October 2024.
It is, but these awards were issued under the old rules, so the
Okay.
old thresholds remain in effect. Any awards issued after October 1st will be under the new threshold of $1 million.
Okay, thank you. Considerations for payments to subawardees like National Labs Institution. I am working on the participant data sheet for one of our subawardees and asked about frequency of payment, single payment in full, monthly, quarterly, TBD. Is this still based on cash basis or accrual basis?
Okay, well, first off, no national lab can require more than 30 days worth of funds from a small business. That's in statute. We do have some fringe national labs on the West Coast, from my experience, that are still requiring like 90 days advance, etc. Please push back. They, via statute, they can only request 30 days worth of funding. Unfortunately, yes, I understand it's a hardship, but you need to, if you're on a cash basis form of accounting, you need to pay that expense first before you can request reimbursement. Now, your timing of it, you may, write the check and then draw down right after you wrote the check. So I'm not going to get into that, but you can't advance yourself funds. Unfortunately, the same would go for high dollar equipment purchase. You have to incur that expense first. And if you're a cash basis, you have to pay for that expense before you draw down. If you're accrual, that's when you book the expense. That's when you can draw down as reimbursement.
Okay, we have a couple questions on the quarterly financial reports. One asking, can these be sent via company email? Can they be sent through FedConnect for security purposes? Will these need to be sent via encryption in the future?
Per the reporting checklist, they're emailed to the mailbox ffr@science.dwe.gov. That's where they're transmitted. There is an individual who mans that mailbox and logs in all those entries. So okay,
that's submitted by email. That's in the reporting requirements. Okay.
Yep.
There's another question about copy of the slides. Yeah, so this webinar is being recorded, so the recording and the slides will be available.
And I'll provide them, yes.
What triggers an update requirement to CPS forms?
Current pending support, if when the CPS was submitted in the application, if that didn't include a project that, say, the PI was working on, and so it was left off in error, that's when, and then you discovered that that it was omitted, that would require an update to the CPS. So we want to make sure that individuals aren't over committed, because we want, we're paying for research, we want to get what we're paying for, and the government does not pay overtime, so it's all based on 2,080 hours for a year. So anything that was left off, or if a project changes, or if the PI was working on 4 projects, but now they're working on 5 after award was made, that would trigger a revision to the CPS.
All right, there's another question here I think I can answer. Is the RPPR due at 3-month mark required to be emailed as a soft copy to the program manager, or sufficient to provide a presentation to the PM following the RPPR format during the PM meeting. Yeah, the
Reporting
phase
checklist
one,
does say it's in person for those, program managers that can attend. And then if the program manager can't attend, then you should contact the program manager to make arrangements to submit that progress report.
and again, it is a verbal progress report requirement, so there's no requirement for you to document anything in PAMs. When you do have a phase 2 award, those progress reports will be written using the RPPR format and submitted in PAMs. Okay, I think another one question about the ending in the quarters here, and I think that would be September 30th was the end of the first quarter for all the folks on this call.
Yes.
So that was when their first report was due. Let's see. Here's a question about novation. Is the timeline feasible for a phase 1 novation within the award period of performance to our company restructuring from a sole proprietorship to an S Corp focused on SBIR derived tech, or should we wait till the potential phase 2 or following round?
I mean, well, it's better to take it to have it addressed during the period of performance. So, because that could affect whether or not your phase 2, say, the phase 1 is made to company X, but the company is acquired by somebody else, or they went from an LLC to an Inc. And so the phase 2 comes through with a totally different name, structure, etc. That could affect eligibility for a phase 2 award. So it is a legal process. Typically takes about 30 days once we receive all the information required from the company. So, and then we would modify the award to recognize that novation. Same takes place or applies to a name change. A name change is less paperwork. It's still a legal process, but it's faster. But again, those are all acknowledged via modification once they're approved. Better take care of it now than later.
Thanks. Our RPPR is also for calendar quarters. I think I can handle this one, Mark. So
Okay.
The progress report, like I said, for phase 1, we've tried to make it, again, less burdensome for you. So we don't actually, only one progress report, and it's verbal. So there's no written progress report for phase 1. There's just a final written technical report. For phase 2, there will be written progress reports. Those are due after the first 3 months, and then every 6 months thereafter. And that will be based not on calendar quarters, but based on the start date of your award. And then 3 months after that is when that's the period of the first progress report is due at the end of the 4th month.
Manny, I would just stress to people, when you got your award, hopefully you got your attachments via FedConnect and read them, because the reporting checklist pages 2 and 3 contain special instructions that are addressing many of the questions that you're answering. Oh, sorry, and that companies are asking. So
right, okay, very good.
Timelines, etc. So please read the documents that you were provided as attachments.
There's a question: may grant funds be used to perform the grant audit if DOE expenditures are greater than $750,000?
You can recover via your indirects the cost of those compliance audits. So that's not a DOE requirement. That's a federal government requirement. So it won't be instantaneous, but you can recover the costs associated with those compliance audits via your indirect rates.
And another question on the reports about where we submit them. And again, I think Mark answered that already. That was specified in your, again, as he mentioned, the reporting requirements document. There's an email address there to submit the SF425. Okay, there's a question here about should the July through September interim phase 1 report follow the RPPR structure. So I did want to clarify the difference between the financial report and the RPPR is for the technical progress report. And I think we've already covered that. So there is only a 4-month verbal progress report that you set up with your program manager. And then the financial reports are on the calendar quarters. I think we'll should address that. I think you already answered this, but do we need to submit for reimbursement or obtain half the cash up front? What's the process?
I missed the first part of that, so it sounded like it's a request for reimbursement.
Yeah, it says, do we need to submit for reimbursement or obtain half the cash up front? What's the process? I think it's,
Okay, well, if you're on invoice, you would have to submit an invoice request via a system called Vipers, which then the program manager would have to concur on, and the specialist at Chicago would have to then approve. And then once that happens, then you would have to draw down those funds. So the majority, I'd say 95% of the phase one awardees or more are on ASAP. So it's when you incur that expense, again, if you're on cash or accrual, determines when that is, that's when you then draw down that reimbursement out of ASAP.
okay, next question, can the project fee overhead be advanced?
There are no advances.
And so I guess in this question, so the overhead would normally be prorated based on the direct expenses.
Right.
And
When
for the
you draw
project,
down, I'll
for
just
the
say
project fee, would that also be prorated over the period of the award?
when you draw down your say you have incurred $40,000 and you want to make a draw out of ASAP to reimburse yourself, that draw should be for those expenses and the proportionate share of your indirects and any fee that you were awarded. So yes, that draw, say you were awarded a 5% fee in your budget, then you can take a 5% of your direct costs that you're drawing down for fee. But again, but there are no advances. It's reimbursement.
Right. On the insurance requirement, only equipment greater than 5,000 is required. Is that correct?
Well, if anything is under 5,000, it's not equipment and wouldn't be covered. So under these awards, any item with a per unit value of $5,000 or more would then be considered equipment and therefore would have to have insurance for full replacement value.
Okay. This one's a little more involved. The phase one project is progressing faster than the original plan, but will not require additional budget by contract end. Does the DOE grants manager need to pre-approve the earlier completion date?
So if you are very efficient and you finish earlier than expected, thank you. No. No.
So there's no, yeah, again,
No,
so
if and any funds remaining at the end of if you finish phase one and you have $5,000 left, that $5,000 cannot then be used in phase two. The general terms and conditions indicate that any remaining funds under phase one will be deobligated and cannot be used for phase two.
once we make an advance payment to the STTR institution, who is responsible for getting their financial reports? Will they need to have completely spent the 30 days funds in order to get the next 30-day funds?
DOE does not have any purview of contract with any subcontractor of a recipient, national lab, university, etc. So whatever arrangement you have, you're responsible for all your subcontractors, all your consultants. So hopefully in your agreement with that sub, you have it worked out on how payment is going to be requested, paid, etc. So we're not really going to get into that. DOE cannot step in and mitigate any problems between an awardee and its subcontractors.
The next question is on TABA reporting. Can you expand on the TABA reporting requirement and the technical reports? I can handle that one if you want.
Okay.
So yeah, when you submit your final technical report, it'll ask you, did you get your own TABA funds? So in other words, if you got $50,000 in phase two to spend toward TABA, that's not going to be recovered and be part of your technical report, which is on the research. So there's a separate reporting requirement to explain what you did with the TABA funds. So there you will basically be talking about, who was your vendor, what different categories of allowable TABA funding did you spend in, and then there's an open block there that allows you to describe what was done and whether you are actually satisfied with that. There's a specific question: if we incurred costs in the third quarter but did not draw down the reimbursement funds until the fourth quarter, do we submit a $0 report?
That's a good question. The form indicates its expenditures, so it's obligations and then expenditures. So I would just be consistent how you've been operating. Don't change things, between one quarter to the next. If you drew down funds in whatever quarter, that's what you should report it for.
Okay, based on the drawdown. Okay. The date for the quarterly report we answered before. I guess maybe if you missed that, that is the end of each calendar quarter. So the first quarter for these awardees were the end date was September 30th.
Right.
How to find out when the phase two is due for one's phase one, such as the call that started July 22nd this year. Yeah, so again, I'll discuss that at the PI meeting next week, but you can go to our website for the DOE SBIR. If you Google DOE SBIR and go to the funding opportunities page, it will actually list for FY 2025 our solicitations, and the phase one release 2 for 2025 would apply to phase 2 release 2 in 2025. And all the dates associated with that funding opportunity are up on our webpage. For the verbal report, should we prepare a presentation on the project progress? That's probably recommended. Talk to your program manager depending on how you're going to present to them. Whether you're going to do it in person at the PI meeting or if you're just going to do it, a Teams or Zoom meeting. In those cases, yeah, I think a presentation is a useful way to organize the delivery of the information. There's a question: is it possible for the PI's employment start date to be later than the award's start date, considering the award was released in September?
I'm sorry, I was trying to type a question. Answer to a question. So was that directed at me? I'm sorry for that last question.
Yeah. I don't see any issue with that, but
could you repeat the question?
the question was, is it possible for the PI's employment start date to be later than the award start date?
Well, possibly. That could be a problem for eligibility. If the award was made based on the fact that the PI was, it indicated that the PI was an employee of the company. If the PI was not an employee till after the award start, that could be an eligibility issue. So hopefully, like if the individual was already a employee of the company, and then they could start after start work on the project after the start date.
Okay. All right, thanks. So there are a few more questions, Mark, and I'll let you handle those just directly answering, and then I will go ahead and move on to Adam for the next presentation.
Okay.
All right, should I share the slides?
Yeah, yes.
Got them.
Okay, we can see it. Do you want to put it in the slideshow?
Are they good?
There you go. Yep, thanks.
Okay, took a second to type. So I'm Adam Lorenzen. I'm a special agent with the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Inspector General, and this should be a fairly quick presentation, so stay put. We're going to cover fraud, primarily fraud, but also waste and abuse in the SBIR programs. So when we talk about fraud, we're talking about lying, cheating, and stealing. I think sometimes folks get worried that they'll fall into fraud on accident, or that they'll somehow get hemmed up without knowing that what they were doing was fraud. And for it to be fraud, there has to be some sort of a lie in there. It has to be something false that's submitted to the government that the government is relying on. Some examples of this could have to do with plagiarized proposals. There could be false information about your company or who the PI is or what the PI's role is going to be or how much work the PI is actually doing on it, or about the work itself. And we've seen all these lists are culled from all sorts of SBIR fraud investigations across the federal government. They're not unique to energy, but there's we have a good amount of examples, and we'll cover one example from energy at the end of this brief portion of the presentation. Also, seeking funding for work that's already been completed. So, as you know, this is for innovative research, and if you've already done the work, then you're not really doing the innovative part. So, those are all pre-award. During the award, we've seen people use award funds for personal use, and if you're using them for personal use or any use other than the proposed activities or what you're supposed to be spending the money on, then you could really get yourself into trouble, particularly if you're submitting any sort of false information to the government about how that funding is being used. And we've seen that, unfortunately, more often than we ought to. In these fraud cases, that is, which I would like to point out is a very small percentage. The vast majority of this money is well used by the recipients, and it's a great program. I have the misfortune, I guess, of seeing a tiny percentage of things where folks are not following all the rules like they should, and that what we can't let that color our views of the SBIR programs as investigators, and we certainly don't want to make it sound like it's rife with fraud. Plagiarized reports again, or reports falsely claiming work has been completed, claiming results for an award that was funded by a different source. And on that note, like if you're submitting for the exact same research to, like, say, energy and to NASA, it just has to be made clear to both those agencies that you're trying to get the funding. And then if you happen to get it awarded by both, you can't actually get paid twice to do the same exact research for two agencies, which is an important rule that I'm sure everyone is aware of, but bears mentioning. Here's a list of some additional rules you should be particularly familiar with. So what I just said, duplicate or overlapping proposals can't be submitted to multiple agencies without fully disclosing that that's what you're doing. Your company has to meet SBA's requirements for a small business, including being majority American owned and have 500 or fewer employees. For SBIRs, the PI's primary employment must be with that company during the grant period. You can't have full-time employment elsewhere, and I've seen this pretty frequently in our cases. So it's a very important one that deserves mention. The PI has to be spending, the majority of the 51% rule of their time working on that grant. For phase one, a minimum of 2/3 of the research effort must be performed by the grantee company. In phase two, it's 1/2 the research effort. And that does not include work performed by university research labs. And particularly if the university research lab is also not actually working on it, and you say that they are, and something like that. These are the sorts of things that would go in that fraud direction. University, and those university employees that are participating should disclose their involvement to the university. So the university should know that's going on, as well as their use of the facilities at the university, and that research and development is expected to be performed in the United States. And if it isn't being performed, at least notify the agency. The important thing here is don't lie and don't misrepresent things. And what happens if you do break those rules and you do lie about breaking the rules? If we get an allegation of fraud, it says here if you commit fraud, but really, if we get an allegation of fraud or other wrongdoing in applying for or carrying out one of these awards, we or some other federal agency, usually an Office of Inspector General for NASA or Department of Defense or other agencies, will investigate these sorts of things and will refer any violations to the Department of Justice. People have been prosecuted, and we'll see an example in a moment here that there are potential things like prison sentences, restitution, and then civil actions under False Claims Act. So, a particularly crafty fraudster might think that they've just narrowly skirted facing criminal penalties for their, lying, cheating, and stealing, but there are other penalties they may face. So the really important thing that we try to emphasize, and the reason for me being here and giving this talk, is just make sure that you're being honest with the government, that you're disclosing everything you're supposed to disclose, that you're following the rules and doing your best effort to do so. And above all that, you're not lying about anything in terms of how you're carrying out your research or how you're spending the money that we've appropriated from the taxpayers. Also, DOE may end up terminating awards, and we've suspended and debarred people from receiving grants or contracts from any federal agency. There was a recent prosecution back in 2022 out in Lexington, Kentucky. A woman named Jyoti Agrawal actually got 42 months in federal prison. And the charges were, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering. She was the co-owner of a company called Science Tomorrow with her husband and the ex-husband, Subadarshi Nayak. Way back in 2013, they had agreed together that they'd submit a proposal, and it had contained a fabricated letter of support from a subcontractor. The subcontractor had no idea that that this letter of support existed, and they weren't actually going to be providing the support. And because of that, they got a phase 2 server. It was about $1 million for a scanning electron microscope detector. And one of the big reasons that Ms. Agrawal got herself into so much trouble is she knew that fake letter had inflated the budget that a university was going to authorize. It had some misrepresentations in it. And she knew that. And she knew that they weren't actually going to use that support from the subcontractor, and still submitted the proposal containing that. And in 2014, Science Tomorrow got this grant, relying on that misrepresentation. And they even got $500,000 from Kentucky, from the state of Kentucky, which matches funds, when there's a federal grant award. Mr. Nayak had left the project early on, and then that out-of-state university, as I said, they didn't work on the project. They received no actual payments. Agrawal never paid any of that stuff. She did spend $146,000 out of that funding to get herself an MBA degree in Chicago, which I think everyone can see was also a crime in itself and supported a conviction on money laundering. So there were some other false certifications associated with that, and other things stating that all the funds had been expended in accordance with DOE's terms and conditions. And ultimately, she had basically pocketed $300,000 of those DOE funds that she said and certified that she had spent on the project. So Mr. Nayak was also convicted and sentenced to less, and then they jointly owe this $1 million back to DOE and $500,000 to Kentucky. So it did not work out for them, but it worked out for the government and the taxpayer ultimately, because we want to discourage people from improperly spending this money and not, using it on what they're supposed to use it on. So how can you report fraud, waste, and abuse? Well, we operate a hotline here at the DOE OIG. And if you ever want additional information on reporting, or to report something that you think is wrong or suspicious or anything like that, you can, screenshot this, you can write it down. The important thing also, if you report something, there's two kind of parallel expectations people have. They think that stuff will happen immediately, and that it will very much be, like black helicopters will descend and will investigate things on their time frame and to their satisfaction, and that is not always the case. And then the other fear is that if they report it, that it will reflect poorly on them or on the program or anything like that. And those are both not true. We're very measured and bureaucratic in the way that we approach these things, and formal. And many times reports don't end up causing any trouble, let's say. So feel free to report things if you see them. You can report anonymously. You can also include your name and contact info and expect follow-up. Either way, we like to say, we just want to encourage folks to report things that they see. And that basically concludes my portion of the briefing. And then I'm open for any questions folks might have.
All right, thank you, Adam. And again, this is, as Adam noted, a very small percentage of our awardees, but there have been, DOE awardees like the one he mentioned that have been prosecuted. And so do be careful. You know what, as he mentioned, you're generally not going to accidentally commit fraud. But the one thing I did want to point out, some people forget and get caught up in the research, is, as he noted, what DOE is expecting you to spend the money on is what you submitted in your proposal. And then, the nature of research is such that you often have to pivot and change directions. And if those changes are, significant from the direction you propose to DOE, you do need to let us know. And that was, again, the point that Mark had made. So just from a fraud point of view, remember what you told us in your proposal is what we're assuming you're spending the money on. And if that is not what you end up spending the money on, you need to let us know in advance so that we can approve those changes. We'll just wait a few seconds to see if there are any other questions coming in under the fraud, waste, and abuse category. This is not one where we usually get a lot of questions like the other two talks. I think most of the information is pretty self-explanatory. So, all right, I'm not seeing any additional questions. So again, thanks everyone. Again, as I mentioned, Mike, Mark, myself will all be at the PI meeting next week. So look forward to seeing you there. And again, so at any time you do have questions, please send them to the general SBIR and STTR email or phone number, and we'll route them to the right people to get you answers. So do you want to make sure that you get the information you need to properly administer your grant? So, okay, thanks. We'll just conclude the today's webinar.